Welcome on behalf of the Greater KC Chamber and the partners that have brought this great event together. My name is Joe Reardon. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater KC Chamber, and we want to welcome you to the community kickoff of what we hope will be a fascinating and productive 2 days as you learn more about opportunities available in Kansas City, Missouri's 5 opportunity zones. And welcome to the boardroom here at Union Station. This used to be one of the Harvey restaurants. It's now the boardroom, not just for the chamber, but we think of it as the community's boardroom and gathering space. And if you're not a Kansas Citian, a point of pride in 2015, when 800,000 Kansas Citians decided to celebrate the Royals winning the World Series, it was right out the front doors of the building here. So it holds a warm place for Kansas Citians. A little over 2 years ago, our Chamber Executive Committee developed a new strategic plan. I'm not going through the whole strategic plan, but I did want to share with you the vision that was developed, principally by Karen Daniel, who was the chair of our board at the time. Growing together, we are nationally recognized for growth, prosperity, and inclusion. That's our vision. That's the charge for our chamber. And that vision has led our chamber down paths we have never been on before, confronting complex and difficult issues in our region, from crime and violence to shared prosperity. Shared prosperity is the vision behind this Investor Summit, and we are passionate about forming the right partnerships and coalitions to positively impact this issue because we know it will take a collective effort to succeed. We believe that our Kansas City region to be truly great, we have to work to give everyone in the region a chance to fully participate in the economic prosperity that many, but not all, enjoy. And there's substantial evidence, as many of you in this room know, that the cities that figure this out are the cities that will grow and develop in the most robust ways. Opportunity zones are well named, designed to foster opportunities in areas of our city too long neglected. One of the partners in organizing this Investor Summit has been the Urban League of Greater Kansas City, a storied civil rights and social services organization that focuses on equality in education, economics, healthcare, social justice, and diversity and inclusion. Gwen Grant serves as president and CEO of the Urban League here in Kansas City, and her commitment to social justice began in the halls of Westport High School, where she and her classmates of color pushed the school administration to hold a Black History Month assembly. She hasn't stopped since in her fight for equality and shared prosperity. Please join me in welcoming Gwen Grant.
Wow, good afternoon. I was like, where did he get that information? Who told you that story? That's an old story. Makes you think I'm old. So I just want to say, we're really excited about today, and I am delighted to welcome those of you who are new to Kansas City to come to be here today to listen to our story about opportunity zones and the important work that we've done to further this endeavor. My role today is to just share with you a little bit about our process. And I want to tell you that it certainly has been a very inclusive process. We started several months ago, and we built a collaborative, relationships across north, south, east and west boundaries, engaging civic, business, faith, and community-based organizations so that we in Kansas City can do a better job, because surely all of you know that Kansas City, like most cities across the nation, has struggled when it comes to economic development and equitable investments in distressed communities that are plagued with crime and blight and high rates of unemployment and poverty. But I came back here today to tell you that Kansas City is working very hard, and we're getting our act together, and we think it's a wonderful thing. We formed this dynamic collaborative of stakeholder representatives of all sectors, as I said earlier, because we believe that profitability and equity can coexist, and that would be a wonderful thing for Kansas City. We have established a list of shared equity values that focus on equitable development that will promote the elimination of practices, policies, attitudes, and cultural messages that result in differential outcomes by race and socioeconomic status, while also supporting investors' need for profitability. We want to collaborate with investors in support of economic development ventures that achieve the double bottom line of good return on investment and revitalized urban communities. So if you share our values, if you are committed to social impact as well as profitability, then you can benefit from our knowledge of community, our assets and transformational projects, as well as technical support to help expedite the process as you navigate Kansas City's economic development landscape. So we have 3 equity values that I'd like to share with you. One is that we want to foster wealth building for current residents through opportunities for home ownership, capacity building for minority businesses and emerging entrepreneurs, and creation of livable wage jobs. 2, we want to ensure authentic community collaboration through early and ongoing investment with Indigenous residents and the intentional alignment with plans developed by and with community stakeholders. And 3, we want to develop sustainable, prosperous, mixed-income communities through an equitable combination of market rate and affordable housing, neighborhood-serving retail, revitalized neighborhoods, and jobs creation. So we're ready to work with like-minded investors to make a sustainable difference in low-income areas in Kansas City. And we invite you to join us because certainly if you do, profitability and equity can coexist, and it will truly be a wonderful thing.
Thank you very much, Gwen. One of our key partners and the presenting sponsor of this summit is the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. Mr. K, as he was known, reflects the rich tradition of entrepreneurship in Kansas City as an entrepreneur and the one who created the Kauffman Foundation to carry out his belief in the importance of education and entrepreneurship, as well as his love of Kansas City. I'm pleased to introduce now Larry Jacob, Vice President of Public Affairs for the Foundation, and whose leadership has been invaluable as we've organized this gathering. Larry?
Welcome, everyone. All right, opportunity zones. Has anybody seen anything like this before? No. And that's why, as Gwen mentioned, we brought together a very robust and very inclusive group of Kansas Cityans to think through, how do you approach this question in a way that does a couple of things? The first thing that it does is focus on how do we build wealth? And how do we focus on building wealth within the communities that the opportunity zones were meant in trying to support overall. The second piece that we're trying to do is focus on systems changes. We'll talk a little bit about KC 101. I'm also going to call up Bruce Katz, who's been working with us, from the very beginning.
I was trying to.
Bruce. So part of getting it right in Kansas City was the foundation, the Kauffman Foundation, taking a step back and talking to other communities. And Mayor Garcetti out of Los Angeles started a group of mayors, of investors, of practitioners in the field when the opportunity zones came to bear to think about how do you make exactly what Gwen said reality, make profitability and equity real in our communities. So we brought together not only our local community, but also some national thought leaders to help us think through that question and talk to other communities about what were they doing, how are they approaching this question, and how might we bring those lessons back. We wanted to focus in on, as I mentioned, building wealth and increasing economic mobility, but for the residents that are living in the zones right now. So that's going to create a different way for us to approach community development and having a different model and a different sense of that. Bruce is going to talk a little bit more about that later. It's going to take us putting entrepreneurs front and center at building new companies and growing and scaling companies that exist in the zones. It's going to take more business growth. It's going to take workforce development. It's going to take all of those elements to see the types of changes that we hope to see here in Kansas City. So what do our zones actually look like in Kansas City? How many folks are familiar with the zones in Kansas City? Okay, a good chunk, but some aren't. So our city is huge. It's a really large city, and I will say, for those that are taking pictures, go ahead. This is also on kcopportunityzones.com, the entire prospectus. This is just a snapshot of it. So working with Bruce and Accelerator for America and the national thought leaders, part of doing something and creating something out of really a challenging set of regulations or a lack of regulations is creating a routinized approach to how investors would approach the conversation. So Bruce and the team developed typologies across the nation to think through how would an investor approach this. So in Kansas City, our city did what the intent of this law was, to focus on the zip codes that are most distressed, that could benefit the most from equity investment. And we have really 5 areas that the city has focused on: Blue Valley Industrial, Central City, KC Cure, Martin City, Paseo Gateway, and SWO. And I just want to pause and say, look, it's important to remember, as we're talking about opportunity zones, who are we talking about? There are people in these zones. And the people that are in these zones look different from the metro, look different from Kansas City overall, and have very different life experience. So one of the things that we hear a lot, as Bruce and I have been talking about this around the country, and as we're talking about it even in Kansas City, is the concept of the opportunity zone tax shelter. You hear that phrase, actually. And I can promise you, if that's where this is 2 years from now, this program will not go on beyond that. It has to focus on the impact and the results within the zones. So I'm going to briefly touch on the typology of each of the zones. There's really 3 in Kansas City that we're focused on. There's the industrial zones, which is Blue Valley Industrial. Advanced manufacturing opportunities, good infrastructure, emerging high tech. There's Martin City, which is more greenfield, which is what it sounds like, a lot of green field. Growing population, though, abundant underdeveloped land, and little economic activity that's starting to emerge, but also adjacent to Richard Gebauer Transportation Hub, which offers up a lot of flexibility and opportunity. But I think the focus of a lot of the conversation in Kansas City, and certainly with the equity group, has been around the Central City zones. Those are the areas that are what we call street corner. Those are light commercial, but a lot of housing, and a lot of residents, and a lot of projects that need to be done. There's a lot of city infrastructure investment that's slated to go in. There's a lot of philanthropy in the area, but equity has been missing for a long time. Private investment's been missing for a long time. And we hope that this process and this one tool stimulates that conversation. So what we're really aiming to do is the street corner hypothesis, not just transactions, but transformational opportunities within each of the zones. And there are 3 demographic areas of that. Swope Park, I'm going to click through these quickly because I know we're running a little behind, I'm sorry. Paseo Gateway, Central City. Those are the zones that we focus the most on, and those are the zones that you can drill into and get a lot more information at kcopportunityzones.com. But before I turn it over to Bruce, I just want to end with thank you all for being here today. Kansas City is trying to get this right. I think we're making progress in getting it right, but it's going to take everybody in this room and people that aren't in this room to make this happen, to get to both profitability and equity for our residents. So thank you, and Bruce, let's talk a little bit about what else has to change.
So thanks, Larry. And I do think a lot of other cities are watching Kansas City because you have an investment prospectus, you have a narrative about building wealth, growing entrepreneurs, and really knitting the city back together. So how do you get from transactions to transformation? And this is still a work in progress, right? So the prospectus is a living document that needs to play itself out. So first, I'll talk a little bit more about this. What's the one-stop shop? As we begin to grow minority entrepreneurs, female-owned businesses, what's the way in which people with a good idea, essentially, get the mentoring, get the support, get the tax advice, and ultimately get the access to capital to bring those ideas to fruition? How do we demystify finance? right? Finance, to a large number of people, is really practiced by what a friend of mine calls the merchants of complexity, right? It's very hard to understand how to actually finance a deal. So I'll walk through some thoughts about investor ready and community enhancing. Third, the capital stack. If we want to do the projects that your communities want, and frankly all communities around the US want, workforce housing, commercial real estate, neighborhood serving businesses, clean energy, fiber, broadband, we're going to have to think about that mix about public, private, and civic capital, investor equity, commercial debt, concessionary capital, and then public incentives. We're going to have to think anew around how to finance most of these deals. Fourth, land ownership. Land is critical here. And as we've gone into many of your communities, it's clear that the public sector, city, county, public authorities own a lot of land, and nonprofits own a lot of land. And so unveiling that and putting that land back into productive use through asset disposition strategies is critical. And the last bit are new institutions. We need institutions in our communities that have the capacity, the capital, and the community standing to get stuff done, right? There are organizations like that, Cincinnati Center City Development Corporation. You have some great CDFIs here, but how do we enhance the capacity of your community institutions to work on these market-oriented projects? So this is just a quick overview of what it means to have a project that's investor-ready and community-enhancing. And Kansas City is frankly the first city to try to think through both of these sets of criteria. Frankly, the market knows what investor-ready is, right? You have site control, you have design specifics, you have construction analytics, and so forth. But what's a community-enhancing project? And not just to get the project done, but to have ownership structures so that at the end of the 10-year cycle of the opportunity zones, this is about building broader wealth for residents, small business owners, right? It's not just about extracting wealth, it's about building wealth. So this will still be played out because this is not set in stone. It's about something that needs to be deployed and worked on. And the last piece is this one-stop shop. And frankly, no community in the United States really has this yet, right? We've built a very intricate system in the United States around growing innovative companies. Think about it, right? We have startups, we have scale-ups, we have incubators, we have accelerators, we have angel money, we have seed money, and all the rest of it. On the other side, when we think about growing neighborhood businesses, we don't really have a system in the US. So we're thinking through a one-stop shop where sponsors and entrepreneurs and developers could come to a place where they could get the mentoring, the technical assistance, and ultimately, if it's necessary, get the kind of public incentives, and you have a bunch of them in Kansas City, as many cities do, so you can marry up public investment to private and civic and philanthropic investment. So this is a work in progress also, but like with many things around the investment prospectus, Kansas City is at the vanguard of the movement in the country. A lot of folks are watching. You'll get many things right, you'll get a bunch of things wrong, but that's the only way in which you're going to move forward. So this notion of using opportunity funds to leverage community wealth building, I think is central to this entire equation. KCOpportunityZones.com. So I'm not entirely sure who's in charge now, but okay.
Thank you, Bruce. Yeah, I'm the guy up and down to make sure we keep flowing. So what's the value of investing in Kansas City? Bob Berkebile is here to answer that question. Bob is known and respected both here in Kansas City and around the world for his commitment and action towards restoring social, economic, and environmental vitality to America's communities through sustainable architecture and planning. He is the founding chair of the American Institute of Architects National Committee on the Environment and was instrumental in the formation of the U.S. Green Building Council and its LEED rating. Please join me in welcoming Bob Berkebile.
Thanks, Joe, and welcome everyone. As you heard earlier, this city is having a moment. and art, music, food, culture, and leadership have given rise to a renaissance of entrepreneurial thinking, new economic activity, and increased quality of life in our community. This is an incredible moment of opportunity in Kansas City and in the heartland of America. Joe and Gwen both mentioned that unfortunately, this hasn't been the experience for all of our citizens. Behind me, you see the image of the Blue River Valley watershed, which includes a large portion of the opportunity zones and the undeniable evidence of some of the unintended consequences of our past industrial development strategies and their impact on the vitality and the underlying natural systems and the surrounding neighborhoods. But more importantly, the vast opportunities to transform natural, social, and economic vitality in this region with new thinking, smart investment at the confluence of the Blue and Missouri rivers, and more importantly, at the confluence of obsolete thinking and regenerative thinking in the heartland of America. Over the past 2 decades, I and my colleagues have had the great privilege of working in 12 communities to help them rethink, redesign, rebuild their lives and communities in a post-natural disaster environment. These include New Orleans, Haiti, Houston, and Greensburg, Kansas. That experience makes it crystal clear that this transformation potential of this opportunity is far greater and much better investment and substantially greater return on investment than any of these cities which have received awards from the Urban Land Institute, Financial Times, and 2 American presidents. Next year, we'll hear from a sampling of Kansas City developers and stakeholders, and later you will enjoy a tour of some Opportunity Zone districts and some pilot projects. As you hear about these and see these potential investments, we invite you to think about this frame of reference and approach, building on what the Kauffman Foundation, the Chamber, the city, and others have set up to enlarge this opportunity. First, it's important to note that we're having this conversation in the breadbasket of America at a time when record number of farms and farmers are underwater financially and literally, while food deserts and the number of malnourished citizens are increasing, and more than 40% of what they produce is wasted before it gets to the user. It's also important to know that all the strategies, tools, and technologies that are required for solving these thorny questions are available, and many of them exist here in this community. They just haven't been integrated and utilized at one time and one place. As our former neighbor, General Eisenhower, said at a key moment during World War II, the only way to solve this problem is to enlarge it. There's a new organization in town that is combining regenerative thinking with the diverse experience of its members and partners to create investment opportunities that will transform the vitality and resilience of this region while redefining return on investment for the investors and the community. Heartland P5 Holdings is a new public benefit LLC created to do this work in partnership with the surrounding neighborhoods, community leadership, local government, affordable housing providers, USDA, and leading agriculture and food entrepreneurs. The Caruso Research Institute and UMKC, and Carbon Cycle, a new waste-to-energy company that is converting waste products, including tires, into high-grade carbon, steel, fuel, and soil amendments with no waste and no carbon emissions, to mention but a few. By the way, the P5 and Heartland P5 Holdings is a commitment to perpetual prosperity for people, place, and planet. I should also mention that Living Economy Advisors is helping us manage the pipeline of investment opportunities. If you'd like to know more as we explore this together in the next couple of days, please ask one of the founding members of Heartland P5 Holdings. I'll ask them to identify themselves now by raising their hands. So check them out and check in with them during the next couple of days. We are delighted you're here. We invite you to fasten your seatbelts, enjoy a glimpse of the future full of transformation and abundance. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob, very much. Next up, we're going to have a great panel discussion and discussing investment in Kansas City from a variety of perspectives. I'm going to introduce the panelists, and when I introduce you, if you could just come up and take a seat, any seat, we'll get started. First up is Emmett Pearson. He's the president and CEO of Community Builders of Kansas City, Kansas City's largest urban core developer. Emmett's development experience spans nearly 30 years in Kansas City as Director of Real Estate for the Community Development Corporation of Kansas City and as Senior Advisor for the Housing and Economic Development Finance Corporation of Kansas City. Emmett, welcome. John McGurk. I didn't see John yet, but there he is. Vice President of Development at for Millhouse. Oh, there you are, John. Wonderful. John's responsible for the development pipeline, entitlement, design, and ongoing development of projects for Millhouse in the Kansas City region. Millhouse specializes in Class A urban multifamily residential buildings. Welcome, John. Gloria Ortiz Fisher, Executive Director of Westside Housing, whose mission is to build robust, sustainable communities. Gloria is responsible for the overall operations and financial reporting. Welcome, Gloria. Josh Rowland, CEO and Vice Chairman of Lead Bank. Lead Bank was the Chamber's 2018 Small Business of the Year, in large part because of its commitment to helping entrepreneurs, women, and minorities, helping them grow their businesses. And then finally, Roxanne Koch, shareholder with Pulcinelli. She's an expert in public-private partnerships with more than 25 years of experience in real estate development and public finance. And the moderator for this, what's going to be an amazing discussion, is again Larry Jacob, Vice President of Public Affairs for the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, and the Kauffman Foundation's our presenting sponsor as well. Larry, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thanks again. So we're going to kick it off, and Emmett, I'm going to start off with you, because I'd like to put you on the spot after like 20 years of knowing each other, right? You have a phrase that you use often: who can actually turn the dirt? Like, who can do this? Who can get the project done, right? So part of what we see with opportunity zones is, these are challenging projects, right? What do you think is going to be needed to actually get things out of the ground, done in the districts that we're talking about, in the zones that we're talking about? How do we do it?
So good afternoon. Larry, thanks for the question. And I think the first thing that's going to be needed is a willingness to work together, cooperation from the public sector, private sector, community, and that takes on a whole nother different kind of conversation, but the stakeholders as well that live in these neighborhoods that you so eloquently outlined. That's one. I think it's going to take organizations that have been doing this work, and rather they're called opportunity zones, empowerment zones, enhanced enterprise communities. If you're old enough to know what UDAGs are and HODAGs, we're going to go way back to some of the old developers. It's going to take folks that have been in those communities doing those type of deals using mixed financing and incorporating the community's voice to get those projects done.
Great. Josh, as a banker, you approach this a little bit different. You look at it longer term, maybe than others. So it's not necessarily project by project. It's like, what's the long term on this? So that's my question to you. Like, what do you see as potential coming out of the opportunity zones, which is just one tool for all of those areas that we're talking about? But what do you think is the potential here?
I do see things maybe a little bit differently. But I think what brings this whole group together is really a sense that this is an opportunity represented in opportunity zones. The thing that I care about as a community banker, though, is sustainable wealth creation that is multi-generational in communities, street by street, in this town. And so to the extent that what we're convening here, as Gwen so carefully and so well said it, is we have to make sure that the people in those communities are part of this conversation, and that we aren't simply approaching this as an investment opportunity that's brought in from outside, that's some idea concocted in Congress or somewhere else and delivered as if there's a silver bullet approach without consulting and drawing on the collaboration, the actual real experience of the stakeholders in those neighborhoods, as Emmett points out. So to me, that's the key question. The key question is not whether we've got a tool now.
Right.
The key question is whether this community, Kansas City, is ready to engage in an honest and deliberate way with people in those communities that we think can benefit and really open it up to disagreement about ideas and how we're going to do it, because that's the way we're going to create multi-generational wealth in Kansas City, when for so long those opportunities have been systematically denied people in those neighborhoods. So if we're going to do that, that's what I'm looking for.
Got it. Well, and you used a phrase that John McGurk and I have talked about a lot, silver bullet, right? And is this just another one of those things that comes along? And I think without that authentic engagement that we're talking about, it very well could be. But John, you have a unique perspective, as a former chief of staff to a mayor, as a development attorney now on the development side. Talk a little bit more about the silver bullet and how do we square this out so that we can get to a level of profit, but also think about the other components of that we've been chatting about today with the Opportunity Zone.
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me. I think this isn't a silver bullet, is what my message would be. Is, and I say, and I've stolen it from someone, I don't know who, so I won't give them credit, but it doesn't make a bad deal good, but it can make a good deal great. Opportunity Zone funding. But the key that I've seen through working on the government side, trying to find developers to do key civic projects, the grocery store at Linwood and Prospect. I started working on that in the mayor's office and then transitioned when I went back to private practice to working for the developer. So I got to see all sides of this deal. But the reality is the people with the gain that you need to attract to invest, they're more patient, and they have to be because of the 10-year hold period, but they still need a return. The deal still needs to pencil. And that's where I think philanthropic and government comes into place to kind of buffer and have some more patient capital, because you're still going to need those people to come in with gains to have the return that they're going to expect either across the street or across town or in another state. But you got to have that return. It still needs to make sense. It can make a good deal great, but it's not going to make a bad deal good.
Yeah, Bruce mentioned capital stack, putting that together and trying to get the deal to pencil out. Gloria, do you have an example or something that you can share with the group here of how do you make all of that work? Can you do it?
So my recent example of this, or what I would like to bring to the table, is 8th Street. It's 8th and Woodland. It's a mixed-use building. It has 5 commercial spaces on the bottom, and then 10 apartments will be on the top. When Westside started looking at this project, it actually was, the momentum came from Legal Aid wanting a new office. So they wanted a new office. They wanted to be on the east side of town. So it was an authentic need that needed to happen. And so we found this commercial building, or mixed-use building, and we're able to get it from Land Bank for $5,000. It seems like a blessing. I always say Land Bank will give us the building for $5,000 and then another $100,000 to start. But however it is, the city was very cooperative with us, and we were able to secure some money there. We went out to the philanthropic community, and on a $1.5 million rehab, I was able to raise $1.1 million. So that really helped to narrow the gap. And on top of that, I would say the community, the stakeholders in the community have come together. We have a really robust group working in the Choice neighborhood, so that the whole, the city momentum was already there with the Paseo Gateway project. Brimshore was building right across the street, so it was really, without this project, you would have had Brimshore's new townhomes and apartments, and then this broken building across the street that would have been nothing. So we were able to secure an outside grant from Institute of Sustainable Communities for solar panels, which allowed us to buy the solar panels for the top of the roof. And the energy that's going to be generated from the solar panels will just pump into the apartments so that we will offer affordable housing with both housing and energy. So the smaller units, the one-bedroom units, will be $500, and that will be your cost for your rental as well as your utility. And then the larger units are 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, and they will be $1,000, and that will include their rent and their utility. It started to pencil out once we got to that $1 million raising on a 1.5. So I really see that it's possible, and I see Opportunity Zone in a different way maybe than some. It's just that it's going to take some philanthropic. It's going to take the government in Kansas City to come together, the chamber, and fortunately with people like Bob and BNIM that we were able to kind of put the design together. And so we really look forward to opening it, and I think that'll probably be December 1, but I think it's a new way of thinking about affordable housing so that when it's the dead of winter and typically your utility spikes up, these tenants won't have that, or in the middle of summer next month or the following, when it's super hot, they won't see a difference. They'll be able to manage their budget and be able to keep everything the same.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Roxanne, that was a somewhat complex deal, right? You've been involved in several very complex deals. What are some of the lessons that we can take from some of the deals you've been in and maybe apply them across? Because even in that example, we were still really talking, philanthropic, we're talking public, so, how do we maybe pull in some of the other resources that the really complex, development deals in Kansas City have into the Opportunity Zone conversation?
Sure, and I think one of the things that, as Opportunity Zones became available, that I've been reminding everybody that Kansas City is going to be competing for investment dollars throughout the country. And where I think that Kansas City, where we're so well positioned, is that it's not just the one tool that we now have. We need to use, as we've all been saying, we need to take a look at our entire toolbox and how do we use that to make developments happen. And every single development has its own challenges. What I love about Kansas City that I think gives us an edge over any other city throughout the entire United States is the fact that we probably have more tools in the state of Missouri, and Kansas City has more experience, and we have more expertise of various different folks, whether it's developers, the city, and all of our different development agencies and legal counsel, who are now adept at using those tools and layering those tools where we need to and getting creative in the use of those tools. So we already have a very creative mindset, and what we really, you got to sit back and you have to take a look at each project as they come and figuring out what do you want to create and what are all of the various different tools that we have and how do we bring those together. I mean, I could talk about all kinds of different projects across the city. One of the things that I've learned, I never quite get the cookie cutter deal. Right. Because they really, and you shouldn't look at them as cookie cutter. You might grab something off the shelf that somebody else did, but you have to take it and make it fit that project. And every single one is different. And that's something that Kansas City gets, and that's what everybody up here does. So I think we've got an edge. And I don't know if I got right to the heart of your question, but I think that that's the thing that's important to know about Kansas City is we've got a ton of different tools, right. And I could name them.
Yeah, and I think matching that up with something Gloria said, we do have very active philanthropy that looks at deals differently. For our foundation, we don't do traditional community development. We're not in affordable housing, and we're not in capital. That's not our role. But we do convene other foundations to talk about this and how do they fit in and how do they best support, and then how do we support the capacity of organizations to deliver on some of those very important items. And back to something Josh said, and Josh, I'd like you to tease this out a little bit more around entrepreneurship. Your bank's been very active in that space. How do we think about creating more homegrown businesses in the zones and growing businesses that are in the zones to the next level as well?
I think that there are obviously a lot of different ways in which we pursue support of entrepreneurship in Kansas City. The question, though, is how do we support entrepreneurship, and let's call it business formation, in communities that have historically been disenfranchised and not included in the formation, in the efforts, capital accumulation and investment opportunities. And if we're talking about yoking that goal alongside an opportunity zone, I think we have to be really candid with ourselves about the ways in which we think about what kind of businesses deserve investment and merit investment. I think we have to be much more assertive and in asking questions of people in those communities about the kinds of business formation that they want to see. And then leading from that dialogue rather than imposing a view around what constitutes a startup. Because I think that even in conversations with through the KC EDC with the idea of creating a minority business accelerator, that seems on its face to some people like a no-brainer. And it does, even when you consider the idea of equity. But the question is if that's a solution that's prepackaged and preordained and being handed to people as if they should be grateful for it, then I think we're stopping the dialogue, the conversation about what constitutes business formation before it's even begun. So what I would like us to be doing as we think about business formation, new business formation, through the Opportunity Zone vehicle is really doubling down on the intentionality of our conversations about how we do that, rather than imposing certain kind of views about what businesses should be where,
Right.
that are derived from, say, the majority experience. Because I don't think that's a recipe for building the right kind of goodwill. And that's what I'd like to see in the way we do it.
When we're in an environment where 0.5% of all new business starts get venture capital. Like we talk about venture capital all the time, but 0.5% across every demographic gets it. About 16% get loans. So 83% are using their personal wealth. And that tends to dictate the type of businesses that get started. So we got to flip that mindset around and approach things differently if we're going to have the type of business growth that we want to see across the city in a more equitable way. So I'm sure there are just a few questions in the audience, and I do think I'm looking for somebody. I think we have some time for questions. So if there are some questions for the panel, for anyone, we're happy to take some. Remember.
If there is a one-stop shop, who are the decision makers and what are the metrics that are going to be used to determine if that project is a go or no-go decision? And I think that speaks to the heart of what Josh is talking about, and that is ultimately the concern within the community that we're talking about developing these practices.
Absolutely. And I think right now, as Bruce said, almost every community is trying to figure that out. And it's very early stage, even in Kansas City, thinking about that. The conversations with the coalition that have been represented here have been thinking about, how do you engage the community in a very proactive way and continue that community engagement over time so that you're getting that constant feedback loop. A place like Birmingham, Alabama has set up a public benefit corporation where there's a community board and an investor board. And that's one model and approach. I think we have to have a Kansas City specific approach, and I think the decision making has to come for those that are both understanding not only the investor side of this, but the community enhancing side. So we're starting more with the vision, Marvin, and thinking through, okay, how do you backtrack from that? And if your vision is wealth building, those metrics, you can go zip code by zip code and start to really think through what that looks like. There's a question over here. Do we have microphone run? We could certainly do it. Or just yell if you can.
How can you make an investor participate in an opportunity zone? That's one question. And the second question is, can you make opportunity zones something that small investors can participate in also?
I'll take that.
Well, I'll at least answer that first part. How do you make people invest? I said it doesn't make a bad deal good, but there's a lot of good deals in these zones to be had, and I believe there's been a lot of blinders for low-hanging fruit outside zones. So I think it really does focus investors that have gains to look at these deals. In the real estate world, we've had 1031 exchanges forever, and people just roll and roll and roll and defer their tax, but that's a pure tax deferral strategy. Here, the tax man will come in 2026, but your gain after that is completely tax-free. So it kind of changes the whole mindset of a 1031 player to pay their taxes. But that's how I think you get them to look at it, is it's providing them a huge incentive if they're looking long-term. So that's why there are a lot of good deals. It's just I feel like these people have been so focused on more low-hanging fruit, but dangling this kind of tax deferral and then tax wiping out at the end of it that's where you're going to get the people involved in this.
Just within the legislation, there's nothing there to say that you have to do both, where it's community enhancing and making a profit. You can just find a zone. There's more than 8,700 of these nationally, and that's what Roxanne was getting to. Investors can go anywhere in the nation on this. And if they're just interested in the profit, really making that profit, they can pick different zones other than Kansas City. Kansas City was very intentional in trying to find zones that could really benefit the community over time. And just on that smaller the investor part, yes, I think there's some emerging strategies and some things that we're seeing nationally of people pooling their money, but also communities and neighborhoods starting to think through how do we buy back and buy into properties, and so that we have that long-term wealth building built in from the very beginning. So another question.
Yeah, how's it going? This question might be more for Emmett. Do you know of any specific legislations that could have been just passed or in the process of being passed that specifically help opportunity zones, possibly even through the EEZ?
You're talking local alignment, right?
Local alignment of public and private to help incentivize development.
Missouri and the metropolitan. Can you all hear me pretty good? I have a big mouth, so can you all hear me okay? What the gentleman, Mr. Edwards, is referring to, it is a newly passed tool that allows for a 20-year tax abatement if you're working in a particular councilmatic district in Kansas City, which is the 3rd and the 5th, which are some of the most distressed areas or distressed zones within our metropolitan area. Then there is the ability to have a 20-year tax abatement that will allow you to do that administratively. And what that means is no financial analysis. The caveat is, and I'm going to talk globally, the caveat is it has to be a minimum of $100,000 investment. It has to create 2 jobs. Health insurance has to be offered. And I think those are the general ideas. That legislation just got passed 3 weeks ago, that this coalition that you heard Larry talk about, that you heard Bob talk about, and Mayor Reardon talk about, was instrumental in getting that legislation in as an additional incentives for opportunity zone funds to lessen their risk and to be able to do more deals and to invest in more entrepreneurs. So that legislation was right on point. So I hope that answered the question.
Great. I think we have a question up front.
Just my question pertains to social entrepreneurship, and I wanted to get your thoughts on how we incorporate 501c3s and those that help overcome community barriers into the opportunity zone effort.
Do you want to take us up?
Please take that one.
Yeah.
As a 501c3, one of the largest in the region, that is rooted in changing the landscape of Kansas City, fueling and igniting equity, opportunity, access, and advocacy. I had to get that in. We just passed a new strategic plan, so had to get the new mission in there. I think I think there has to be really a diligent effort to go back to supporting those nonprofits, specifically those organizations like Gloria and mine, community development corporations. Typically, in the communities that Kansas City is highlighting, which is more neighborhood focused, the churches and the nonprofits, CDCs particularly, were the backbones of any type of development, community engagement, workforce development. That was a starting point. And to be very candid, the Kansas City area as well as the country has moved away from those type of programs that help strengthen and grow the capacity of those organizations. They really are the fuel that really helps different activities such as affordable housing, such as mixed-use projects to come along. But if you don't support those organizations, then we can't bring the next generation of community practitioners. They won't be there. So, I'm lucky enough to be able to be in this field. I've been in this field for 25 years. I'm lucky enough to have fantastic staff, which they're in the back, raise your hand, that are community-minded. They could go elsewhere to work, and to have organizations like the Kaufman Foundation to help support organizations like mine as well as others.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Yeah, right up front here.
One of the things that I was really attracted by in the presentation was the fact that specific zones in our city have already been targeted as those opportunity zones. But I feel that this point that is being made clearly illustrates the need for the first phase of all of this great funding opportunity, Mr. Berkebill, should be directed towards specifically the urban core. I think the third and the fifth are, in my opinion, after 75 years living in this diaspora, is that it's the most distressed area. I remember Senator Philip Curls used to ride in his district and say it was the most bombed out neighborhood in this community. And I'm pleading today for those who are in this room who are the money-making folk who deliver, to be sure to think of in the first phase of all of this development. I don't want to put out that we don't want stuff in the 6th District or we don't want stuff in the South Kansas City area. Mike Hughes is standing up for stuff in the 3rd District, the area that is still the most blighted. And I love what you did, Ms. Kennedy, in your tour. But the 3rd is still the most distressed, Ms. Roxanne. Please send your money and your development opportunities to us. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. I think, Joe, do we have one more? We have time for one more question. There was a hand right behind. Okay.
One very fast question. Is there a strategy or tactics regarding bringing in foreign investment as a French national? I would be thinking of something like sister cities implementation or something in that sense to channel more open resources.
So, and group jump in here, but I think, that type of funding, because of the way the tax law was written, you wouldn't get any tax benefit from that directly, but it would be similar in the way that we're thinking about philanthropic funding. So when you're looking at the transformational projects, what are the different streams of funding that can help make a project go and fill that gap that, some had talked about. Some of it will be philanthropic, some of it will be other private money outside. So opportunity zone, like the tax benefit portion of that is gonna help a little bit, right? But the way that the group, and Gwen really pushed on this, the way the group has approached this is just a way to focus the conversation on the areas that need the most support, but do it in a way that we can think just differently enough to rise above our own self-interest for a bit and get the job done for the communities. That's the way that we're approaching this in Kansas City. Anybody else? Oh, are we good? Okay. So we got one here and one here. I think we have time for two last.
We've been doing this for 30 years, and we don't think that should not be a prohibitive now because the regulations are so much more relaxed than what they were 30 years ago. So we go through this a lot.
Emmett, you want to jump in?
I would just echo that. Community Builders of Kansas City basically has built $250 million on swampland. So any kind of environmental remediation that has needed to be occurred, our team has been able to do that with sustainable development for over 28 years. So please don't let that be a deterrent. Those nonprofits, you have two of the best attorneys regarding development, and they've dealt with all these issues, so that shouldn't be a deterrent at all. Thank you for your comment. Oh, that's right, recovering attorneys.
We had a hand up over here.
Thank you for your time. My name is Kenneth Yancey. So I'm sitting here listening to a lot of smart people that have a lot of good data, right? So as you all know, it's very easy to collect what I call primary data, and that is what people really want and what they would do with this sort of opportunity. So my question is, so I'm hearing that you have a decision-making process, you have an education process, and you have an implementation process. And you're also talking about a return on investment, the ROI. So my question is, do you guys have a plan, or is there a platform in place today that will collect this primary data from the people you want to serve? Because we don't have to do surveys anymore. We don't have to put things just in the paper. We can track people now and find out what they really want and how you investors will get your fastest return on investment. So my question is there a plan for some type of primary data collection engine that will feed everything that you're talking about today?
Emmett, jump in on this, Emmett, too, but my Sidewalk, which has been a partner of this from the beginning, is actually supporting that effort. So every community group meeting we have, every other meeting that we have, they have a tool called My Mixer that allows us to capture that data and put it into a systematic place. And we're exploring other options as well for that ongoing conversation with the community to make sure that that feedback loop continues to happen. Okay. Are we good for one more, Joe? Okay. All right, seriously, one more. All right. And I'm happy to stick around after if there's something specific.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Friedman. I'm a realtor from St. Louis. I work with Congressman Clay there. The realtor who represents Congressman Cleaver is also here. We're very much involved in this nationally. I want to congratulate all of you for bringing us together and providing this phenomenal model. Your leadership in this community, which is outstanding, much better than our leadership in St. Louis, I must say, and the work that you're doing at all kinds of levels, whatever it is. The question I ask for you is, thank you again, is all this material going to be on your website, including the data that was just asked about, community data, is that going to be on your website? So we can take this back to our community, and all the people in this room can share that with your communities here.
So go to kcopportunityzones.com right now, and you can see the full prospectus. You can also see data by the zones, and the community-based data will be rolled out ongoing as that continues.
And the video also? I forgot to ask about the video. Is the video going to be up there?
Which video was?
Well, I'm assuming you're videoing this event.
Oh, that video. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Well, yeah, man, it's been a while, but I didn't really see a video here. So, yes, we'll post everything from this event here.
And the work of Bruce Katz's work also.
Absolutely.
So that we can share this kind of perspective, which I think is really important, that the program really supports communities. Right. As opposed to just supporting investors.
Absolutely, and there's, through Accelerator for America as well, there's a lot of sharing that's happening between different cities, and Accelerator has been putting that out on their website and also putting that out through their social media channels. It's another great avenue, because what you hear from are mayors that are doing the work in the communities, you're hearing from investors that are investing in the communities, and you hear from practitioners who are doing the work, people like Emmett all around the country that are doing the work too, and people like Gloria. Oh, thank you. Okay, I lied. One more. She's got the microphone.
Well, I saw Joe nodded his head yes earlier.
Joe's just going to yank me off whenever. So,
my name is Adrian Foster. I'm the Region 7 advocate with the Office of Advocacy, and so I'm part of the executive branch appointed by the president, and we work on regulations. And not all regulations are bad, but to ease up the economy and our businesses, We are getting input as the opportunity zones are being formed, and we want to hear from you in regards to anything that you guys may be having troubles on as you work through the opportunity zones. But I also want to let you know that one of the things that you said is this is not going to make a bad deal look good. And I'm going to just say on one thing is it could, because we are going to have an opportunity where the EPA, where HUD, where the U.S. Department of Commerce is going to offer grants that normally are offered in different sectors, but specifically you're going to be able to layer them one on top of another in opportunity zones. For instance, if you have a greenfield and you want a greenfield grant, you'll be able to get a greenfield grant if it's in an opportunity zone. It's going to have preference on top of that. And also, if that opportunity zone that gets a greenfield grant also is going to build housing or something else, then you could also put on top of that a HUD grant. So there's going to be 167 different types of grants that's going to be available. So look for that in the next couple of weeks. And if you have any troubles, Adrian Foster, somebody has my contact information, come see me.
Can I jump in? One of the things, a challenge, is the current 180-day threshold, which is problematic. I understand when I was up on the Hill that there was some conversation about maybe extending that a little bit longer, but the 180 days in some of the areas that we're talking about is extremely problematic. Unless you have a deal that is ready to go, cleared, that is not a realistic from a real estate development side. That's just very hard to do. Typically that works if a municipality has a plot of land that they're trying to put a baseball field on or something like that, that works. But if it's not that, that's a problematic. And then let me just say this, and I'll put down the mic. I'll drop the mic.
No, I was going to ask you for closing thoughts, guys. So you can go first for closing thoughts, and then everybody else can think about it.
And then the other thing, I'm going to say this, and this is not political, but the deals and the scale of deals that Community Builders has been engaged in did not get done without some type of federal assistance, particularly earmarks. I'm going to just put it out there, and it's not a political thing, but those really help thrive and grow projects. This particular facility that we are in, was it not for a $2.5 million EDI grant from Kit Bond, would not have happened. The health center, Swope Health Services, would not have happened without a $3 million earmark. So we can have this particular tool, and that's fantastic, but we still have a huge gap, and I will drop the mic.
Ask for my panel. You know what? I'll clap for that too. Gloria, any closing thoughts?
So I think this is a big challenge for us as well as an opportunity. And from the limited information that I've been getting all over the country about opportunity zones, I think that it's going to take everybody in this room to come together around a 30-month start to finish build project, and everything has to fall together. And we've never done it before. So we're going down a road we've never gone before, and we got a time limit, and there's no ease to that or no second chance. But I think putting the minds together, and I think we do have a very collaborative city right now, and when we come together, I think we get great things. So that's my closing remarks.
Thanks, Gloria. John?
Yeah, I'd just say there's a lot of fear of, the gentrification word with this tool. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case, but just across the railroad tracks, Kansas City has a wonderful tool to keep artists in the crossroads and keep that authentic. And I'd really stress the EDC, the city, the new mayor, and council leadership to kind of look at tools like that overlay to make sure that the people that are living in these areas are not forced out because of rising property rates. Because rising property rates are great, but they can be very detrimental, as we're seeing with our reassessments this year. It's going to be a problem for people. So.
Yep. That's a great point.
I would echo, I think that we are in a moment in Kansas City where there's both a kind of an enthusiasm, and I see a couple of Casey Heart Pride t-shirts in the back. There's a lot of that. And I think that there is a real, there's a real sense of the need for this opportunity to come together. I think the key thing for me is that collaboration doesn't mean that there's a kind of a unanimous agreement. It doesn't mean that it's simple. Collaboration is hard work. Inclusion is hard work. And that what we have to be prepared for, and I'm really gratified to be part of this discussion today and know that in Kansas City, we've started with an inclusive approach at the very outset. But we have to be prepared to disagree and to persevere through disagreement to make something great for Kansas City. But just because people disagree doesn't mean that we're not on the same team. And we have to welcome that disagreement, because if we do, if we hear people in a way that we haven't heard people in Kansas City, then we have something to be proud of. Then we are beginning to rectify things that cause the problems in the 3rd and 5th district. Then we begin to do it. But it's a beginning that comes out of listening for difference and persevering through that. So I'm optimistic, but I'm optimistic because we have energy here to deal with that forthrightly and honestly and make something happen for our town.
That's going to be hard to follow. That was an amazing closing remarks. But what I do want to say, and what I know about Kansas City and what I have seen that we have done over 30 years. I started practicing law in Kansas City about 30 years ago, and nothing was going on downtown. And when we put our mind to it and we saw the stars aligning, and there were a lot of people that did that, we saw a transformation of downtown. What I'm really excited about Kansas City is utilizing all of the creativity that we put into downtown and all the minds that we have in Kansas City and bringing in this outside investment. What I feel that we've done downtown, we really can accomplish it in our most now highly distressed areas. So I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to working with others in this room to do that.
Yep. And I'll turn it back over to Joe, but I'll just end with this. I think the potential is here. It's real. But we have to be bold, we have to be creative, we have to be focused on what the intent is. And if we do that, we do have the potential in the opportunity zones and beyond to make the kind of changes that I think we all want to see and support them over time. So I'm going to turn it back to Joe, but I want to thank you all for coming out today and thank our panelists for helping us get educated even more. Thank you, guys.
That was a great panel, and even better, it almost turned into a full-blown conversation, which is fantastic. And I just couldn't resist letting Larry, get one more question in. So thank you, Larry, for doing that. Finally today, to officially welcome you to Kansas City, Missouri, I am pleased to introduce to you Councilwoman Alicia Kennedy, representative of the city's 5th district, of which Kansas City's opportunity zones are a part. Would you please join me in welcoming the Councilwoman?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that warm introduction, Mayor Reardon. On behalf of the City of Kansas City, I'm really excited to welcome you to this day of talking about what opportunity zones mean to Kansas City, and for those in this room that are investors, what the opportunities and the uniqueness that Kansas City has to offer in that space. And if I could ask for a show of hands, who are the investors in the room? Okay, it's scattered throughout. Well, there's going to be a bus tour, and for those that are not from Kansas City, you're going to have an opportunity to get a preview about what some of these distressed communities look like. And as been mentioned before, I represent the 5th Council District, which is Southeast Kansas City. Within my district, Community Builders of Kansas City, which Emmett Pearson is the newly appointed executive, is there, have done amazing things to revitalize a portion of that community that was really once swampland. And now it's a vibrant, thriving commercial corridor with Class A office space and fresh groceries and retail that people want to shop in. So when we talk about what opportunity zones look like in Kansas City, it's important that we make sure it reflects the needs of the community. There's another site in my district at 63rd and Prospect, which falls within the Swope area. We've got a developer that's eyeing that location, and we've had a lot of community conversations about what that development site should look like. They told us very clearly what they did not want. But we also knew it was going to take a lot of effort to get what they did want to desire. And so what our hope is that as you guys go forward, and those that have the patient capital, those that have opportunity funds looking to invest, that you partner not only with the CDCs, but some of the small-scale developers, and some of the developers that are investing in the region at urban redevelopment project areas, to be looking out for opportunities, because there's so much available. There's so many land sites. There's the tax incentive that's available, but I believe firmly in the premise of doing well while doing good. And there's opportunity for us to do both in this space. So in Kansas City, you're going to have a plethora of deals that are going to come together. And typically money goes where it grows. We know that. But I encourage the money that's in this room to take the time to get to know some of the local developers who have experience in developing in urban communities in Kansas City. Because my background, I'm a lawyer by trade, and I was a prosecutor in Jackson County before I got elected to the city council. And part of my job was working with neighborhood stabilization and making sure communities were safe, because that's the first thing before you invest any money. And I will always share with my team that dealing in disadvantaged communities is a lot like algebra. 2 + 2 doesn't always get 4. You have to know the unsolved variables that you need to solve for. And you get that by talking to the people in the community. So there has to be a robust community conversation about equity, about what's fair, about what's just, to be able to uplift those people that live in those communities. So there won't be a scream and holler about property taxes going up if there's economic opportunities being presented at the same time. They won't scream and holler about the change of the dynamic in the community if they're able to participate in the ownership at the same time. And so we have to be intentional and deliberate about how we do these things, but most importantly, it has to be a collective conversation. And today is one of the first steps in doing that. And so I want to applaud the leadership of the Chamber, of Kaufman, and also Diane Cleaver with ULI, who's not here today, who I understand that she's out of the country traveling on congressional business with her husband. But the leadership is going to be the key, because there's a lot of opportunity, and people won't talk about the challenges, but leadership will be bold. Leadership will be innovative. Leadership will bring people to the table and match interests and opportunities to make something happen. So it's not just who's going to move the dirt, who's going to impact the community. Who's going to do well by getting the returns on their investment? Who's going to be the next champion of urban redevelopment in this city, or commercial redevelopment in this city? And so I don't necessarily think that we have to compete about what parts you invest in, because there's enough money out there to invest in all parts of Kansas City. Our goal is to attract it, to look and consider these options that are on the table, and for us to work with them as we see the impact as it occurs. So I appreciate everyone that's participated on the panel today. We heard from a very robust and diverse group of individuals, but I'd also like to point out where the diversity was. The people who are doing the work in the community, the CDCs, Emmett Pearson, African American man, Gloria Fisher, a Latino woman that are doing the work, and the people who are putting the deals together are not always diverse. And so when I say having bold leadership that's willing to address that, some of the data that was presented earlier, 57% of the demographic in these opportunity zones are African Americans. You're going to have people of color at the table. If you want to have real impact, if you want to be able to address the unsolved variables, if you want to create equity, you have to make sure your deal is inclusive. I've been on this council now for 4 years, and so many times we have development projects where they say, well, the team was put together already. They bet on the come. We can't have that with opportunity zones. And so I encourage this group, as you're enjoying your beverages in a few hours and you're riding along, looking at all the spaces in the community, get to know those that are from this community. So as you're putting your development team together, you have diversity reflected, because that is going to be the #1 way you're going to make sure that you're going to have the most impact. And so I appreciate all of the practitioners in this space. Again, I'm an attorney, and I would love to be a developer one day and cross over like my good friend John McGurk. But in the meantime, being a champion for equity of those that are already operating in that space is where I have the most influence. And I encourage you all today to stay engaged, to build the relationships, and be intentional about making the investments in Kansas City. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilwoman. I will say that Kansas City, Missouri has been blessed with an amazing governing body, and the Councilwoman is certainly reflective of that. Let's give her another round of applause for. Well, this has been a great start to what's promising to be a great today and tomorrow. And so we're rounding out this part of our session as we're coming together. And the next thing for many of you that have signed up will be a bus tour, to get out there and see it, right? To get out there and be in it and be a part of it. Those buses will begin loading outside the doors of Union Station at 3:45. So you've got about 15, 20 minutes to get to know one another if you spotted someone across the room. And then please be outside at 3:45 for the tours. And if you have any questions, Laura Dryden or Sydney Wycliffe will be here, and others that are a part of the chamber to help you with anything you need. Thank you all again very much for being a part of today. We really greatly appreciate it.